piece of a lot of this that seems insane to me is we are now years after, whether man-made or not, one of the worst disasters in human history. And we are genuinely less prepared for the next one than the last one.
It's not one of the worst disasters in human history. I could name 100 worse ones.
Fair enough.
Bill Maher brings yet another one onto real time. This time it is Ezra Klein. And this guy comes in trying to push the narrative that COVID was one of the worst disasters in human history. And the moment he says it, Bill Maher stops him right there and sets the record straight. Let's get into this clip where Bill Maher has to step in and put Ezra Klein in his place live on real time with Bill Maher. Let's get into it.
Book Abundance, Ezra Klein, and he writes the weekly Dish newsletter and hosts the podcast, The Dishcast with Andrew Sullivan. Andrew Sullivan. Okay, here are the questions. Andrew, what do you think of news that British intelligence knew COVID was a lab leak in 2020 and officially ignored their report?
Not just knew, aided a 95% certainty. Same with the German intelligence service. March 2020. There's a new book out called COVID's Wake. I was reading it this last couple of weeks, and the core paper that killed off any idea that this was a lab leak in China, the proximal origin paper, which was produced with Fauci and Collins of the NIH and NIAID helping it along, was a lie, a conscious lie. That the people who looked at it, we now have their emails, are saying in the very first days of looking at the virus, this looks very man-made to us. This is so friggin' obvious this is man-made. Well, so friggin' obvious, one of them said. And then they wrote the report saying there is no evidence that this was made in a lab. The question is why? Why would they lie to us about that? And they did.
Well, I can give you one answer, the New York Times. The New York Times said any questioning of this being from a lab was racist, which always struck me as odd because it seems much more racist to go, wow, these people are eating bats.
I know.
I mean, it's just one example, but a good example of why people lost faith in the left, because they do stupid things like that. Not to be an I told you so, but from the very beginning I was saying this shouldn't even be political, but it's at least a 50-50 it came from the lab, and that in 50 years, I can't imagine people going, wait, you mean in 2020, there was this thing that escaped from a lab in Wuhan, that started in Wuhan, and there was a lab in Wuhan that was studying it, and they didn't think that was connected, and they blamed it on bats, really? It just doesn't make any sense.
It makes a little bit more sense.
You can gaslight people so easily.
Yes. I don't think the Democrats are so much as fault as scientists who went along with this, knowing better. It's their integrity I'm concerned about, to actually lie and distort what they could see with their own eyes because they were afraid of politics. The other question is...
And this is a point that does not get made enough. Look, everybody lies. The left lies, the right lies, politicians lie, ducked. That is nothing new, but what is genuinely terrifying is when the scientific community starts lying. Not just about where the virus came from, but about how to treat it, whether the jab would stop transmission, all of it. People were being lied to on every single level, and a lot of them never even realized it. And the worst part is they guarded those lies so hard that anyone who even dared to question the official narrative got completely blacklisted. People going on Joe Rogan with real research, real books, real finding, and they get thrown out of the scientific community for it just because it did not fit the story they were pushing. That is not science. That is control. And that should scare every single one of us.
This lab was a gain of function lab. That means they were creating viruses, dangerous viruses, to figure out how to protect you from them. This gain of function research was always dangerous. Everyone knew it was dangerous. A long time ago, you go back to 2015, you will find a big meeting in London where they say there's one lab in the world most likely to have a problem with this, Wuhan. Do you know who was the biggest supporter of gain of function research for the last 30 years? Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci. Yeah. Now, remember that name. There's a reason he was given a pardon back to 2014. There is something very wrong going on here.
You know?
Yeah, I also don't think he did it for nefarious reasons. There's an argument to be made. There's an actual intellectual debate to be had. Should gain-of-function research be done? We want to get ahead of viruses. The other answer is, the other response would be, it's too dangerous. Because if it gets out, it's going to be bad. And that's what happened. But I don't think he's an evil guy. Like some people do, who was trying to get rich off this.
No.
Okay, he just made the wrong call.
No, he knew from the get-go that the Wuhan lab had security levels that were the average of a dentist's office. They should have been at the highest level imaginable. He knew that. Not only that,
he made the wrong call.
The NIH and NID had helped fund it.
Right. No.
So you don't want to go down in history as the person who helped develop the virus that killed millions of people. You want to go down as the one who saved millions of people. That was at stake, a reputational matter.
A piece of a lot of this that seems insane to me is we are now years after, whether man-made or not, one of the worst disasters in human history. And we are genuinely less prepared for the next one than the last one.
It's not one of the worst disasters in human history. I could name 100 worse ones.
Fair enough, but it was bad. I didn't enjoy it.
Let's not be purple.
It was a bad pandemic. Let's put it that
a
way.
lot worse.
As pandemics,
genuinely not my point on this.
Okay.
I'm happy to see. I'm happy to see that the Holocaust was worse than the pandemic. I think it's fine. But in other things, other countries, in this country, right? After something terrible happens, you often have these big bipartisan commissions that come up with a bunch of recommendations and try to create preparedness for next time. I sort of agree with you that we've gone way too far on airport security for too long, but we did a lot on things like biosecurity that made sense and actually did make us safer.
Yeah.
And we have anti-learned lessons, right? On the one hand, we had amazing success with things like Operation Warp Speed, and now you got RFK Jr. running HHS. On the other hand, a bunch of huge mistakes were made on things like lockdowns, and we're just arguing about them. We haven't put out, say, a new best practices, right? Gain-of-function research, which y'all were just talking about, it is just an argument. It's something I try to keep paying attention to, and they haven't come out with strong new guidelines. Bird flu, everybody I read who knows what they're talking about says we are in a terrible position on bird flu if it actually begins to mutate and make the jump. We just have never figured out a way to find a policy equilibrium here, as opposed to sort of keep rehaving the argument.
And honestly, what exactly does this guy want us to do here? Are we just supposed to start lining up for vaccines for every single disease that might possibly show up someday, whether it ever actually arrives or not? Like, where does it end? I want to know what you guys think down in the comments. Do we treat this like a 9/11 moment and completely overhaul everything the way we did with airport security? Or do we just keep moving forward the way we are? Because honestly, I think we have been doing just fine. People have been screaming about the next giant pandemic my entire life, and here we are. The worst thing that actually happened was getting locked inside our own homes, and that was a government decision, not a nature decision. It was rough. A lot of people suffered, and that is genuinely unfortunate. But I think we are going to be okay. Call me naive, but I really do think we are going to be alright. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about Bill Maher shutting this whole thing down live on Real Time with Bill Maher.